Picture this. You're a wealthy merchant in Florence, 1502. The invitation arrives on the finest parchment, sealed with crimson wax bearing the crest of the most powerful family in the city. Your heart races with excitement. To dine at the Palazzo Medici is to touch the very pinnacle of Renaissance society. You don your finest silk doublet, polish your silver buttons until they gleam like mirrors, and make your way through cobblestone streets lit by flickering torches. The palace looms before you, its windows glowing with the warm light of 100 candles. Music and laughter spilling into the night air like promises of unforgettable pleasure. But as you cross that marble threshold, adjusting your velvet cap and straightening your shoulders with pride, you have no idea that you're walking into a carefully orchestrated theater of death. The wine that will soon touch your lips, the exotic delicacies that will tantalize your palate, even the very air you're breathing, heavy with perfume and incense, could all be vehicles for your destruction. Welcome to the golden age of Renaissance poisoning, where dinner invitations were sometimes death sentences wrapped in silk ribbons. Before we dive into these chilling tales of culinary murder, if you're fascinated by the darker corners of history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring the sinister secrets hidden beneath civilization's most glittering surfaces. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we can explore these centuries-old mysteries together, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with humanity's capacity for both brilliance and betrayal. The Renaissance was an era of unprecedented artistic achievement, scientific discovery, and cultural refinement. But beneath the surface of this golden age lurked a shadow world where poison was both art and science, where master craftsmen devoted the same meticulous attention to creating deadly compounds that Michelangelo brought to sculpting marble. The wealthy and powerful lived in constant fear, knowing that any meal might be their last, any cup of wine their final toast. Poisoning during the Renaissance wasn't simply about killing someone. It was about doing so with such subtlety, such sophistication, that the victim never suspected until it was far too late. The most skilled poisoners were artists of death, capable of crafting compounds that could mimic natural illness, create the appearance of divine judgment, or even allow the victim to live just long enough to change their will in the poisoner's favor. The banquet hall itself became a battlefield where every sense could betray you. Master poisoners understood that presentation was everything. They studied the psychology of dining, the social rituals that made people lower their guard. They knew that in the warm glow of candlelight, surrounded by laughter and music, even the most cautious guest would eventually relax their vigilance. This was their moment to strike. Consider the case of Alfonso II d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, whose wedding feast in 1579 became a masterclass in sophisticated assassination. The celebration lasted 3 days, with hundreds of guests consuming course after course of elaborate dishes. But hidden among the legitimate revelers were agents of his political enemies, men who had spent months studying the palace routines, bribing servants, and learning the intricate choreography of aristocratic dining. The poison they chose was subtle, designed to work slowly over the course of the feast. Mixed into a particular vintage of wine that only the Duke was known to favor, it began its deadly work during the second night of celebrations. Alfonso initially attributed his growing nausea to overindulgence. By the third day, as his condition worsened, physicians were summoned, but they diagnosed food poisoning from rich foods. The Duke died 2 weeks later, his death attributed to natural causes brought on by excessive celebration. What made this assassination so ingenious was its patience. The poisoners didn't need immediate results. They understood that a slow-acting toxin would be virtually impossible to trace, especially during a feast where everyone was consuming rich, exotic foods that could easily mask the taste of poison. The Duke's own gluttony became the perfect cover for murder. The most notorious family in the annals of Renaissance poisoning was, without question, the Borgias. Pope Alexander VI and his children, Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, elevated the art of poisoning to levels that would have impressed the ancient Romans. Their weapon of choice was a compound they called la cantarella, a mixture of arsenic, phosphorus, and other deadly ingredients that could be tailored to work at different speeds depending on the dosage. The Borgias didn't simply poison their enemies. They turned poisoning into a form of political theater, a way to send messages that echoed throughout the corridors of power across Europe. When Cardinal Michel died at a Borgia banquet in 1503, his death served multiple purposes. It eliminated a political rival, confiscated his considerable wealth for the papal treasury, and sent a clear warning to other potential opponents about the price of crossing the Borgia family. The preparation for a Borgia feast was like planning a military campaign. Servants were carefully selected for their loyalty, often through a combination of bribes and threats. The kitchen staff was monitored by trusted agents who ensured that only the intended victims received the poisoned dishes. Even the seating arrangements were strategic, placing targets in positions where their reactions could be observed while keeping allies safely distant. Lucrezia Borgia, often portrayed in popular culture as a passive victim of her family's machinations, was actually a sophisticated poisoner in her own right. She developed a technique of hiding poison in hollow compartments within elaborate rings, allowing her to discreetly add deadly compounds to drinks during seemingly innocent toasts. Her poison rings became legendary, inspiring both fear and fascination among European nobility. But the Borgias were far from unique. Throughout Italy, France, and other centers of Renaissance power, poisoning had become almost routine. The Medici family of Florence, despite their reputation as patrons of art and learning, were equally ruthless in their use of poison to eliminate rivals. Catherine de' Medici, Catherine de' Medici, who became Queen of France, was suspected in numerous poisoning cases, including the death of her daughter-in-law, Jeanne d'Albret, who died just 2 months after smelling a pair of perfumed gloves that Catherine had given her as a gift. The sophistication of Renaissance poisoncraft was truly remarkable. Master poisoners studied medicine, chemistry, and botany with the same dedication as legitimate scholars. They understood how different compounds affected the human body, how to mask bitter tastes with spices and sweeteners, and how to create symptoms that mimicked common illnesses. Some poisons were designed to create the appearance of heart failure, others to simulate plague or consumption. One of the most feared techniques was the use of delayed-action poisons that could be administered days or even weeks before taking effect. These compounds would accumulate in the victim's system gradually, creating a slow decline that appeared natural. The poisoner could be far away when death finally occurred, creating a perfect alibi. This method was particularly popular for eliminating inheritance rivals, as it allowed time for legal documents to be altered before the victim's death. The banquet setting provided perfect cover for these deadly activities. The elaborate ritual of Renaissance dining, with its multiple courses, complex preparations, and emphasis on exotic ingredients from around the world, created countless opportunities for introducing poison. A merchant might die from arsenic hidden in imported spices from the Orient. A nobleman could succumb to mercury disguised in a rare delicacy from the New World. The very wealth and sophistication that defined Renaissance dining culture also made it vulnerable to exploitation by skilled poisoners. The psychology of the Renaissance banquet worked in the poisoner's favor. These events were displays of wealth, power, and cultural refinement. Guests competed to show their sophistication by sampling exotic dishes and rare wines. The social pressure to appear worldly and unafraid meant that even cautious individuals would often override their instincts and consume food or drink that might otherwise have made them suspicious. Master poisoners understood these social dynamics intimately. They knew that a guest who refused to drink a toast or sample a special dish would be seen as insulting their host. They exploited the elaborate etiquette of Renaissance dining, using politeness itself as a weapon. The very customs designed to show respect and friendship became tools for murder. The preparation of poison for a banquet required extensive planning and intimate knowledge of the target's habits. Poisoners would study their victims for months, learning their favorite foods, their dining preferences, even their seating habits at formal occasions. This intelligence gathering was crucial because the poison had to be delivered in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. Some poisoners specialized in exploiting the theater of Renaissance dining. They would stage elaborate diversions during the crucial moment when poison was administered. A sudden commotion, an unexpected entertainment, or even a carefully timed accident could provide the split second needed to add deadly compounds to a specific cup or plate. The grandeur of Renaissance banquets, with their multiple servants, complex service rituals, and constant activity, created perfect opportunities for such misdirection. The tools of the trade were as sophisticated as the poisons themselves. Hollow rings that could contain liquid poison were just one innovation. Some poisoners used specially designed utensils with hidden compartments, allowing them to add deadly compounds while appearing to serve food normally. Others developed techniques for treating table linens or napkins with contact poisons that would be absorbed through the skin. Venice became a particular center of poison innovation, largely due to its position as a trading hub connecting Europe with the exotic East. Venetian merchants had access to rare plants, minerals, and compounds from around the world, providing poisoners with an incredible variety of materials to work with. The city's glass-making industry also contributed, as skilled artisans could create containers and delivery devices of remarkable sophistication. The famous Venetian courtesan Veronica Franco, while known primarily for her poetry and intellectual salons, was also suspected of using poison to eliminate rivals and troublesome clients. Her dinner parties were legendary for their wit, beauty, and intellectual discourse. But several guests died under mysterious circumstances after attending her gatherings. The combination of her intelligence, connections, and access to exotic materials made her a formidable figure in Venice's shadowy world of political intrigue. The rise of professional poisoners created an entire underground economy. These specialists commanded enormous fees for their services, often more than master artists or skilled craftsmen could earn in years of legitimate work. The most successful poisoners were essentially consultants, offering their expertise to anyone wealthy enough to afford their services. They operated through networks of intermediaries, maintaining careful distance from their clients to avoid detection. Some poisoners specialized in particular types of assassination. There were experts in making deaths appear natural, specialists in creating symptoms that would blame rival families for the murder, and even craftsmen who could time deaths to coincide with significant political events. The most skilled could craft poisons that would remain dormant until triggered by specific foods or activities, allowing for incredibly precise timing of the victim's demise. The psychological impact of widespread poisoning paranoia transformed Renaissance dining culture in profound ways. Wealthy families began employing food tasters, usually servants whose job was to sample every dish and drink before their masters consumed anything. These unfortunate individuals lived in constant fear, knowing that they were essentially human poison detectors whose deaths would serve as warnings to their employers. The practice of using food tasters created its own opportunities for poisoners. Clever assassins would sometimes poison the taster with a slow-acting compound, then use fast-acting poison on the intended victim. When the taster showed no immediate ill effects, the target would consume the poisoned food, only to die before the taster's symptoms became apparent. This technique required precise timing and extensive knowledge of how different poisons affected the human body. Some wealthy families went to extraordinary lengths to protect themselves. They imported their own cooks from distant regions, reasoning that foreign servants would be less likely to have connections with local enemies. They had their food prepared in sealed kitchens with limited access, and they often ate from specially made plates and cups that were supposedly able to detect poison by changing color. The belief in poison-detecting tableware led to a thriving market in supposedly magical or alchemical dining implements. Wealthy patrons paid enormous sums for cups made from unicorn horn, which was believed to neutralize any poison. In reality, these were usually made from narwhal tusks or other exotic materials with no actual protective properties. But the placebo effect provided psychological comfort to anxious diners. The paranoia surrounding poisoning also influenced Renaissance art and literature. Paintings of the period often included subtle references to the dangers of dining, with symbolic elements that warned viewers about the potential for betrayal and death hiding behind beautiful facades. Writers like Machiavelli incorporated poison plots into their works, both reflecting and reinforcing the atmosphere of suspicion that permeated aristocratic society. The famous painting, The Last Supper, by Leonardo da Vinci, while depicting a biblical scene, also resonated with contemporary fears about betrayal at the dinner table. The dramatic gestures and expressions of the apostles, their varied reactions to Christ's announcement that one among them would betray him, captured the very real anxiety that Renaissance diners felt about the possibility of treachery hiding behind familiar faces. The development of antidotes became almost as sophisticated as the poisons themselves. Wealthy families maintained private physicians who specialized in toxicology, and these medical experts developed elaborate treatments for various types of poisoning. Some antidotes were based on legitimate medical knowledge, while others relied on superstition and folklore. But the very existence of these treatments provided some psychological comfort to those living in fear. The most effective protection against poisoning was often social rather than medical. Families formed alliances and mutual protection societies, agreeing to share information about suspected poisoners and to provide refuge for members whose lives were threatened. These networks operated like intelligence services, gathering information about planned assassinations and warning potential victims. The decline of Renaissance poisoning culture began in the 17th century as political structures became more centralized and legal systems more sophisticated. The rise of nation-states with professional armies and bureaucracies reduced the political effectiveness of assassination as a tool of statecraft. Additionally, advances in medical knowledge made it easier to detect and prove poisoning, increasing the risks for would-be assassins. However, the golden age of Renaissance poisoning left an indelible mark on European culture and consciousness. The techniques developed during this period influenced assassination methods for centuries to come. The psychological impact of living under constant threat of poisoning shaped social customs, architectural design, and even culinary traditions in ways that persisted long after the immediate danger had passed. The legacy of Renaissance poisoning also contributed to the development of modern toxicology and forensic science. The cat-and-mouse game between poisoners and their potential victims drove innovations in detection methods, medical treatments, and investigative techniques that would eventually evolve into the scientific approaches used by modern law enforcement and medical professionals. Perhaps most significantly, the culture of Renaissance poisoning revealed fundamental truths about human nature and the corrupting influence of power. The same intellectual curiosity and artistic sophistication that produced the masterpieces of Renaissance art and literature also created ingenious methods for murder. The wealthy and powerful, surrounded by beauty and culture, lived in constant fear of those closest to them, never knowing when a trusted friend might become a deadly enemy. The forgotten feasts of Renaissance poisoners remind us that civilization's greatest achievements often coexist with its darkest impulses. Behind the magnificent palaces, the glorious artworks, and the elegant social rituals of the Renaissance lay a shadow world where dinner invitations could be death sentences and every meal might be the last. These sinister banquets, where poison flowed as freely as wine and death wore the mask of hospitality, represent one of history's most chilling examples of how human ingenuity can be turned to the darkest purposes. The next time you raise a glass in a toast or accept an invitation to an elegant dinner, remember those long-dead Renaissance nobles who lived and died by the deadly rules of their glittering world. Their stories echo across the centuries, reminding us that danger can hide behind the most beautiful facades, and that sometimes the most sophisticated killers are those who understand that the perfect murder should look like perfect hospitality.